That seat's taken. Move it. That sentence didn't sound like a suggestion. It sounded like a verdict. A white man in a navy blazer leaned back, foot propped arrogantly on the armrest of a chair he hadn't reserved, his voice slicing through the quiet like a switchblade, loud enough for the room to hear, soft enough to sound civil. Malcolm Reed, 42, stood motionless. He didn't react, didn't argue, didn't flinch, just stood there, one hand on a worn leather laptop bag, the other adjusting his event badge. "You hear me?" the man added, now with a smirk. "This is the executive section. You need to leave." Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to Malcolm. The Monarch Convention Center was quiet marble and whispered power. Inside the executive lounge, it was all velvet seating, poured espresso, and billion-dollar side conversations. The TechBridge Summit had drawn out the industry's elite founders, CTOs, legacy investors, and one black man in press slacks, a dark gray shirt, and no visible logo. Malcolm Reed didn't look like most of the room, and that was intentional. No entourage, no nameplate, no signal of wealth, but Tom. The seat he was walking toward, it had his name on it, literally, printed on the back of a discreet reservation tag. Reserved for M. Reed Keynote, 11:30 a.m. But he'd barely taken the steps toward it when he arrived, the interruption and a $2,000 suit, and generational arrogance. "That seat's taken, move it." Malcolm didn't move toward it again. Instead, he sat down quietly in the chair beside it, unfolded his tablet, typed one word, noted. The air shifted. A young woman across the lounge, Clara Ng, freelance journalist, 27, tilted her head. She tapped record, just in case. Because 5 minutes from now, the man who tried to displace a CEO was about to get replaced himself. "Excuse me, sir." The hospitality lead finally spoke, but she didn't speak to the man slouched across the reserved seat. She spoke to Malcolm. "Please don't disturb our VIP guests," she said, lips tight behind a forced smile. He looked at her just once, then back at his screen. Didn't say a word. The other man laughed. "See, even the staff knows." That got a few chuckles from the leather chairs nearby, not loud, but sharp enough. One man in a navy polo leaned over and whispered to his colleague, "He doesn't look like a keynote speaker." The other shrugged, "Probably marketing." Malcolm Reed didn't move, didn't speak. He just tapped once on his tablet. A soft chime sounded in his earpiece. "Johnny," he said quietly. The voice on the other end was crisp. "Yes, Mr. Reed. Protocol 9. Silent mode. Timestamp now." "Understood." At the front of the room, a flat screen cycled through speaker bios. Photos, titles, company logos. Then it paused. Malcolm Reed, founder and CEO Dynatech Systems. Keynote speaker, 11:30 a.m. Building the future of data sovereignty. No one noticed it yet, but Clara Ng did. She zoomed in, whispering to her phone, "Oh my God, he's the keynote." The man in the navy suit pressed and stretched theatrically, then planted both feet on the floor. He looked at Malcolm, still seated next to him. "You know, some people walk into rooms like they're welcome," he said. You walked in like you stumbled through the wrong door." He smiled like it was a joke. Malcolm didn't laugh. He looked at Preston, slow, measured, then finally spoke. "No," he said. "I walked in like I owned the agenda." Preston blinked, clearly not expecting a response. The staff lead returned, holding a tablet. She looked confused now, tapping frantically. "Sir," she said to Malcolm again, "your badge doesn't match the lounge access list. This area is only for confirmed keynote-level attendees." "It does," he replied. "No, I'm looking at the list right now." She paused. Her screen updated mid-sentence. A red error popped. Then, suddenly his name appeared, not just on the list, but flagged VIP. Her face changed instantly. So did her posture. "I apologize, Mr. Reed, Clara said, stepping closer. Malcolm Reed, the Malcolm Reed. Preston furrowed his brow. No way. He scoffed. That guy's worth billions. I saw his interview with Bloomberg. He stopped. Clara turned her phone toward Preston. Smile, she said softly. You just tried to humiliate the most powerful man in this building. The room was shifting. Not loud yet, but rumbling. Malcolm didn't raise his voice. He never did. Instead, he said one sentence, quiet, direct, aimed at no one, heard by everyone. I didn't take your seat. He looked at Preston. You took mine. Behind the desk, the hospitality lead's hand trembled slightly as she held her tablet. Jeanette's voice returned softly in Malcolm's ear. Security access reset complete. Preston Miller's badge and credentials have been flagged for protocol review. Malcolm didn't nod. He didn't need to. He just leaned back, crossed his leg, and let the silence work. Because the man who thought he could push him out was about to be shown the door, the lounge was no longer silent. It was holding its breath. News moved quietly, like heat through glass. By the espresso bar, a whisper became a ripple. He's the CEO of Denatech. A woman in a beige coat leaned to her friend. That's Malcolm Reed. No one answered her. They were too busy watching. The man who had just been dismissed, pushed, insulted was still seated, still silent, still writing something on his tablet. And the one who told him to move, he was fidgeting now. Preston Miller, portfolio manager at Echelon Group, known more for his networking than his strategy, was starting to sweat. Through a $1,000 shirt, Clara stepped forward. She wasn't hiding her phone anymore. You just told Malcolm Reed he doesn't belong, she said, voice clear, sharp. You know how many startups build on his code? How many platforms run on his architecture? Her voice cut through the murmurs like a blade through cloth. Preston tried to play casual. Look, I didn't know. That's the problem, someone muttered behind her. Another voice. He didn't ask. He assumed. The staff lead stood frozen at her station, watching the room shift, watching something unravel that had never been held together properly in the first place. Behind her, the hallway doors opened. Two figures in dark suits entered, not police, not hotel security, internal operations, event compliance team. They moved like people who already knew the truth and just needed the paperwork to catch up. The room watched them approach the desk, then shift toward Preston. He backed up instinctively. This is insane, he mumbled, then louder. It was a mistake, a misunderstanding. Malcolm finally looked up. His voice was low, almost soft. No, he said. It was a reflex. The words hit harder than a shout. A reflex to disrespect. A habit wrapped in confidence. That's not a misunderstanding. That's muscle memory. He stood. The height difference didn't matter. Malcolm wasn't towering, but somehow, the air around him was. I've been here before, he continued. Not this room. This pattern. He looked at the staff, then the crowd, then Preston. At 28, I was mistaken for a caterer at my own company's launch party. At 33, a doorman asked to see delivery credentials at a hotel I built. At 40, AVP candidate asked me if I was here to fix the Wi-Fi. He paused. So no, Mr. Miller, you didn't start this pattern, but you walked right into it. Preston had nothing left to say. One of the compliance officers stepped forward. Mr. Miller, we need to speak with you outside, immediately. Preston hesitated, glanced around, hoping someone would intervene. No one did. No one moved. The crowd parted silently as he walked through. No applause, no drama, just gravity. The weight of being wrong in front of people who now saw clearly. Back inside, Malcolm returned to his seat. Clara lowered her phone, still recording, but now out of respect, not exposure. A man near the back, previously indifferent, now whispered to his colleague. That was the most dignified takedown I've ever seen. And the lounge, once polished and proud, now felt different, like a courtroom that had just witnessed judgment. And no one even had to raise their voice. Malcolm didn't move right away. He let the air settle, let the silence stretch. The kind of silence that asked its own questions. Preston was gone, but the room wasn't done. Near the corner, by a brushed steel minibar, a young staffer still hadn't moved. Name tag, Jordan Leahy, event intern. He stood half hidden behind a frosted column, tablet pressed to his chest, watching everything unfold with the look of someone who had seen this before, but never this clearly. He took a breath, stepped forward. "Sir," he said, voice barely above a whisper, "I scanned you in this morning." Heads turned. Clara raised her phone again. "You came through VIP protocol. Full green light. Keynote tier." He looked toward the staff lead. He was always on the list. "I saw it." The lead's jaw tightened. "Then why didn't you say anything?" Jordan straightened, not combative, just honest. "Because you didn't ask. You assumed he wasn't." That broke something, in the room than the staff, in the lie they told themselves. Another attendee stood, a woman in a crimson blouse and silver heels. "I saw it too," she added, at check-in, his pass scan. It was clean. Malcolm didn't smile. He didn't need to. He turned to Jordan. "What's your role here?" "Logistics intern," Jordan said quickly. "Second week." "You did the right thing. You just did it a little late." Jordan nodded, eyes down, then lifted his gaze. "Won't happen again." Malcolm held his stare for 1 second longer than comfort required. "Make sure of it." Across the room, someone finally muttered it. This was racial. It wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. It cracked the air more than anything else had. The woman who'd said it, mid-40s, Indian American. Badge-reading legal advisor Fencevic looked directly at the event manager. "Call it what it is. If this were reversed." She stopped herself, but she didn't have to finish. Everyone understood. The staff lead stepped back, visibly shaken. No one offered her a rescue. Malcolm sat again, this time slower, not tired, anchored. A quiet moment passed, then a memory surfaced. Charlotte, age 19, summer internship, First Tech Expo. He'd worn a blazer too big for him, name badge handwritten with a Sharpie. A man at the door, white, mid-50s, clipboard, looked him up and down, then said, "Deliveries are on back." He'd slept in a car the night, didn't cry, didn't post about it, just wrote 3 lines in a notebook. Build it, own it, return through the front. And now, here he was, back through the front, not to be welcomed, but to remind them why he didn't need permission. Clara lowered her phone again, then raised her hand. "Mr. Reed," she said gently, "would you be willing to comment on what just happened?" He looked at her, not unkind, but distant. "No." She blinked, just a sentence. Malcolm leaned forward, voice steady. "This isn't content, it's consequence." Clara lowered her hand. So did everyone else. Because now they knew. This story didn't need a headline. It was one. No one had touched their coffee in 15 minutes. The lounge was still full, yet somehow it felt suspended, like the air was too thick to sip through. Malcolm sat, not in protest, not in posture, but in position. A man occupying space the room had tried to deny him, and now had no choice but to acknowledge. Across from him, the event staff huddled in a corner. No one said the word crisis, but they moved like it. One of them typed urgently on a tablet, glancing over her shoulder like an apology might appear on the screen if she refreshed fast enough. Another wiped sweat from his forehead, pretending to read a clipboard that was blank. The lead still stood stiff behind the welcome podium. Her eyes stayed low, but her face was no longer composed. From the far window, an older man finally stood. Early 60s, crisp pocket square, retired, by the ease in his walk. He approached slowly, the kind of slow that meant respect. When he reached Malcolm, he didn't offer his hand. He simply nodded. "I've been waiting to see this for 30 years, he said quietly. Malcolm looked up. The man continued, "Not the disrespect. That's never stopped. I meant the way you responded." Malcolm tilted his head, not understanding. "You didn't react," the man said. "You revealed." Then he turned and walked away. No name, no agenda, just truth. That was when the tension shifted, not in noise, but in stance. People started leaning forward, not in defense, but alignment. A man from HR, a partner from legal, a young woman from media ops. None of them said a word. They didn't need to. Their presence was already a statement. We're watching now. Malcolm tapped his earpiece. Jeanette. Yes, sir. Update. Jeanette's voice was all steel and calm. Echelon Group just received a level to ethics flag from Dynatech's partnership board. Their upcoming API bid has been frozen pending review. He didn't smile, but something in his shoulders relaxed. And Preston? His credentials have been revoked from the secure keynote floor. Badge deactivated. Malcolm nodded. You did it fast. Johnny answered without pause. No, sir. You did it slow. We just waited for your signal. From the edge of the room, Jordan the intern hadn't moved, but his posture had changed. More upright, less hidden. He was watching Malcolm now, not like a witness, but like a student. Clara noticed too. She scribbled something in her notebook, then underlined it twice. Power doesn't need volume. It just needs witnesses. Malcolm stood. It wasn't an announcement, but it made the room rise. Some sat straighter, some rose to their feet without realizing it. He adjusted his sleeve, looked once toward the event staff, then toward the crowd, and finally, toward Jordan. You stay, he said softly. Jordan blinked. Sir, this space, it's yours too. Don't shrink when it pushes. Jordan nodded slowly, jaw tight with something he hadn't had before. Maybe clarity, maybe fire, maybe both. The moment hung, full and fragile, like Justice had just walked through the door, but quietly, in soft shoes. And the question no one dared ask out loud was, why did it take so long for someone to sit where they already belonged? The doors to the lounge opened wide, this time, not with a push but a presence. A woman in a sharp blazer entered, clipboard in hand, headset tilted slightly. Event protocol. She walked directly toward Malcolm, not to confront, to consult. Mr. Reed, she said briskly, the auditorium is ready. Keynote is in 5. Malcolm looked around. No watch check, no flinch. He simply closed the tablet, stood, and nodded once. Then he turned back not to leave, but to pause, to let the room sit in what had just happened. The hush wasn't awkward anymore. It was charged. The woman waited, patient, even she could feel it. Malcolm scanned the room, not fast, not casual, with intent. He looked at each cluster staff, founders, journalists as if he was seeing them not for what they were now, but what they chose to be when it mattered. And they knew it. No one dared break his gaze, not out of fear, but because they knew they had already been seen. Then he spoke, just once, just one sentence. You all saw what happened. That's all. And that was everything, because it shifted the burden from silence to responsibility. Jordan exhaled hard. Clara's pen didn't move this time. Even the espresso machine held its steam. Malcolm turned toward the hallway, then paused again. He turned back to the hospitality lead still standing stiff at her podium. She hadn't moved since the beginning. He walked toward her slowly, each step deliberate, soundless, but heavy. When he reached the desk, he didn't accuse. He just asked a question. What's your name? She blinked. Sarah. Sarah, he repeated, like weighing the syllables. Then, you get to choose whether this is the worst moment of your job, or the one that changes how you do it. He didn't wait for a reply. He just let the words sit with her, with everyone. Clara felt her throat tighten. The older man from earlier, the one who'd watched from the edge, nodded to himself, like ticking off a ledger long overdue. Because Malcolm didn't destroy anyone. He didn't scream, didn't demand. He didn't cancel them. He confronted them with truth and gave them a mirror. It was more uncomfortable than rage, and far more lasting. Malcolm walked out, but he left gravity behind, like the air had to rearrange itself in his absence. One by one, the conversations resumed, but softer, more careful. No one touched the reserved chair. It sat there, empty, still holding the imprint of the man they'd tried to push out, still radiating the lesson no one could ignore. Because power had sat there, and didn't need to announce itself. It only needed to stay seated. The walk from the lounge to the auditorium wasn't long, but it felt like crossing a threshold from assumption into attention. Malcolm didn't rush. He moved like time belonged to him, like the stage wasn't waiting for him but anchored by him. Behind him, the protocol manager whispered updates into her headset, but no one in the hallway was watching her. They watched him. Attendees parted as he passed, not ceremonially, but instinctively, like gravity shifting. Inside the auditorium, light pooled over a circular stage. Rows of chairs, screens flickering, logos rotating across digital banners. Dynatech, Cloud Atlas, Cypherwell. The pillars of digital infrastructure, some of them built on his code. At the center stood a clear podium. No mixed stand, no barrier, just space. And Malcolm stepped into it like he'd done this 1,000 times. Because he had, just never after this kind of silence. The room dimmed. A voice boomed from the sound system. Please welcome to the stage our keynote speaker, founder and CEO of Dynatech Systems, Mr. Malcolm Reed. Applause erupted, not thunderous, but intentional. The kind that doesn't fill space, it claims it. Malcolm nodded once, no wave, no preamble. He reached the podium and paused. No slides appeared. He hadn't brought any. He didn't need to. His presence was the presentation. He leaned forward slightly, eyes scanning the crowd not for familiarity, but for friction. Then he spoke. I'm not going to open with a story today. His voice was firm, calm, completely in control, because the story already told itself. Whispers exchanged across the room. Some nodded, some froze. He continued. I was asked to speak on data sovereignty, and I will. But first, I need to talk about a different kind of architecture. He stepped away from the podium now, hands free. The invisible structure of power, of presence, of assumption. The screen behind him, still cycling logos, froze, then blacked out. All attention turned to him alone. He looked into the room and let the weight build. You build systems long enough, you notice what breaks first. He paced once, slow. Infrastructure isn't just servers, it's culture. And the culture of assuming who belongs in the room. He stopped, is the oldest error code in this industry. No one moved. Even the ones who disagreed didn't dare shift. Because he wasn't performing. He was diagnosing, and they knew it. He continued, voice steady. Today, my badge was scanned. My seat was reserved. But I was treated like an intruder, and a room built partly on my work. A pause. And yet here I am. He looked up. Because presence is not a permission, it's a decision. Back in the lounge, Jordan stood alone by the monitor, watching the live feed on a mounted screen. His reflection in the glass looked different now, straighter, brighter, like standing near the kind of clarity had changed something inside. And somewhere behind him, Clara whispered under her breath. He turned a chair into a stage, and on that stage, Malcolm's voice settled into the walls. Not loud, but unforgettable. The room wasn't blinking. Malcolm didn't raise his voice. He never had to, because when a man speaks from solid ground, the floor listens. He stood center stage, eyes steady, voice steady. I'm often asked, he said, what's the hardest part about building something from nothing? He scanned the crowd, CEOs, founders, fund managers. They leaned forward, expecting talk of capital, code, regulation. But Malcolm gave them none of that. The hardest part, he said, is convincing a room that already made up its mind that you belong in it. A breath passed. Not just his. Half the room inhaled like truth had just brushed against their ribs. He continued, not because you lack credentials, not because you're unprepared, but because your presence threatens a story they've told themselves. He paused. The story where you are the exception, where they are the norm, where leadership still looks like them. No one dared check their phone now. Even the moderators sat still, because Malcolm was doing what most people only pretend to do. He was telling the truth, and he wasn't doing it to inspire. He was doing it to interrupt. I've seen this pattern, he said. Security guards called on me while I held the deed. Investors asking if I'm the assistant to my own co-founder. Panel moderator skipping my bio like it was a typo. The screen behind him flickered again. This time, it showed one line. Credential does not equal acceptance. Malcolm turned slightly. Recognition without respect is decoration. He faced the audience again, and I don't bill for decoration. Up in the mezzanine, someone whispered, Jesus. Another. This isn't a keynote. It's a clinic. Malcolm kept going, every word a scalpel. I'm not here because I fit the mold. I'm here because I broke it, and then refused to leave the room I'd reshaped. He stopped pacing, not to be tolerated, but to lead. A pause. You see, when you build long enough, you stop asking permission. You stop waiting for applause. You learn to read silence and still speak. From backstage, the coordinator whispered into her mic, "Don't cut the feed. I don't care if he goes over Tom." And still, Malcolm pressed on. His final words weren't loud, but they rang. I don't want access. I don't want inclusion. I want the floor because I built the structure it stands on. A hush, then a ripple, not of sound, but of understanding. He nodded once, as if to himself, then walked off stage. No music, no spotlight trail, just a man exiting a space he had already reshaped. Backstage, someone finally breathed. Clara. She had watched the whole thing from a hallway monitor. God, she whispered. He didn't just speak. He dismantled the room. The auditorium didn't erupt in applause. It rose in silence. Like standing wasn't a reaction, it was a recognition. Malcolm was already gone. Backstage, he moved with the same quiet precision. Jacket unbuttoned, tie slightly loosened. His team flanked him at a respectful distance, not to guard, but to witness. Outside the stage doors, a line was already forming. Not for autographs, for clarity. People didn't want a photo. They wanted 5 seconds to apologize, to confess, to realign. But Malcolm didn't slow. He gave only nods, no handshakes. His words had already done the work. Back in the lounge, Jordan stood frozen at the monitor. His phone vibrated. Once, twice. Unknown ID. Saw the stream. That was your boss. You're learning from a storm. He smiled barely, then straightened his shoulders. He looked around. The room was different now. Not redesigned, but redefined. A man with a Stanford pen on his blazer avoided his eyes. The staff lead, Sarah, paced alone, still holding her tablet like it could rewind time. Then Clara reappeared. She wasn't filming now. She was just watching. Jordan looked at her. You think they heard him? Clara tilted her head. They didn't hear him, she said. They felt him. She pointed to the screen, now black again. That wasn't a speech. That was a reset. At the far end of the room, someone began collecting untouched drinks. The space wasn't social anymore. It was sacred, not because of decoration, but consequence. Meanwhile, Preston sat alone, not at the bar, not in a meeting room, just a side hallway bench. His badge, now deactivated, hung limp on his chest like a weight he couldn't shed. His phone buzzed with missed calls, none from allies. One text read, "You're trending, not the good kind." He looked up, and for the first time that day, he looked inward. No defense, no smirk, just the quiet hollow that follows ego undone. Across the center, another attendee, mid-30s, Indian American. Black framed glasses, pulled out a notebook. She'd written nothing all day, but now her hand moved quickly, not quoting Malcolm, but listing questions. Who do I dismiss without realizing? What assumptions am I breathing in? When did silence become my shield? 3 questions. Not to post, not to preach, just to sit with. Outside, the summit resumed. Panels buzzed, deals whispered, people forgot coffee orders. But under it all, under the hum of startup optimism, Malcolm's presence still vibrated. Because something had shifted. Not in noise, but in awareness. And awareness doesn't fade like headlines do. It lingers. It rewrites how you enter rooms. It challenges how you use chairs. And if you're listening, really listening, it reminds you that power doesn't need to knock. It just needs to take its seat. By mid-afternoon, the sun had shifted. Shadows stretched longer against the polished floors of the Monarch Center. But something else had shifted, too. Not just in the program. In the people, the air wasn't heavy anymore, it was honest. Every panel that followed felt different. Not because of who sat on stage, but because of who they now knew was watching. In Lounge D, where it all began, someone finally removed the reserved placard from the chair. Not to erase the moment, but because no one dared sit there. Not yet. Not until they were sure they understood what it cost to claim space with dignity. Clara found herself standing by that very chair. She hadn't intended to, but her feet led her there. Jordan noticed. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" he asked softly. She didn't look up. "I'm thinking that chair used to just be furniture." He waited. "Now," she whispered, "it's a mirror." Jordan nodded. Neither of them sat. Downstairs, at a breakout session titled Leadership Without Ego, the seats filled faster than expected. Someone in the front row asked a question not listed on the agenda. What does it mean to lead without being the loudest voice? The panelist AVP from a rising AI firm paused, then said, "Ask Malcolm Reed. He just taught the whole building what that looks like." The room went still again. Not out of fear, out of respect. Somewhere in the exhibitor hall, a young founder scribbled notes furiously. "Presence permission. You don't need to yell. You need to exist fully. Stay seated even when they try to move you." She wasn't taking notes on a product. She was taking notes on how to walk through the world. And in a tucked-away corridor near the speaker green room, Sarah, the hospitality lead, sat alone on a bench. No one was scolding her. No one needed to. She held her tablet, the same one that had once refreshed late. But this time, she wasn't using it. She was just looking at her reflection in the screen. Not out of vanity, but confrontation. Because some moments don't disappear when the room empties. They echo until you face them and answer with change. On the rooftop cafe, Malcolm sat in rare quiet. No crowd, no tension, just sky. He stirred his tea slowly, phone flipped face down. A soft breeze pulled at his collar. Jeanette's voice buzzed gently through his earpiece. 3 press requests, one from Forbes, one from Fast Company, and one from a tech ethics journal. Decline all, Malcolm said. No follow-up. Let the moment speak. He looked out across the skyline. Below, buildings stretched tall glass, steel, ambition. But above was just sky, open still, uncomplicated, and finally, for a moment unjudging. He closed his eyes, not because he was tired, but because stillness is sometimes the loudest answer. The summit neared its close. Name tags peeled off, coffee cups emptied, panels wrapped with polite applause, and investors began glancing at airport clocks. But something lingered. Not in the agenda, that was over. It lingered in the way people walked, in the way they looked at who was walking beside them. Like for the first time, they were actually seeing. At the far end of Lounge D, the chair was still empty. No one had touched it. It wasn't fear. It was memory. Because while the name tag was gone, the meaning hadn't faded. It stayed in the fabric, the frame, the absence. Jordan passed it again. This time, he stopped. He looked at it not with awe, but with awareness. He glanced around. No one was watching. So he sat, not slouched, not casual, back straight, shoulders set. Not to pretend he was Malcolm Reed, but to remember what it looked like when someone refused to stand, just because the world expected him to. Clara saw him from a distance. She didn't interrupt. She took a photo. One frame, no caption. Just a young black intern seated in a chair that had become a symbol. She didn't plan to post it. She planned to remember it, because some images don't need audiences. They just need to exist. Upstairs, the event director, a woman in her 50s, sat alone reviewing next year's summit layout. She stared at the panel titles, at the lineup she'd approved months ago, and slowly began replacing names. Not to be performative, but because she realized visibility isn't the finish line. It's the starting point. She circled a session title, "How Rooms Remember Who They Ignored," then underlined it twice. Meanwhile, across the city, in a co-working space lit by harsh fluorescence and dim hope, Three black founders gathered around a laptop. One of them had streamed the keynote. Now they watched it again. Not for the tech talk, for the stance. Man didn't even raise his voice. One whispered. The other nodded. Didn't have to. The third, younger than the rest, leaned back. That's how you flip a room. With calm. With presence. They didn't quote his speech. They quoted how he made them feel. Back at the summit, a cleanup crew began clearing the lounge. A vacuum hummed. Water glasses clinked. The reserve chair was the last to be touched. The custodian stood over it for a beat too long. Then, with careful hands, she wiped the arms, adjusted its angle. Not for alignment, but for respect. She didn't know the full story, but something in her said, this seat held a storm. Malcolm had already left. No goodbyes, no closing photo op, just his name, still glowing softly on the summit's digital signage. Not flashing, not rotating, just there. And that was enough, because those who needed to know already did, and those who needed to remember would never forget. The sky had darkened. Glass towers reflected the last hints of gold, then faded into a gray quiet. The summit was over. Badges discarded. Hashtags gone. Key cards deactivated. But not everything powered down, because somewhere, in every corner of the building his presence lingered. Not in words, not in press, in posture, and how people now entered rooms. Jordan was the last to leave Lounge D. He stood by the door, looking back at the space one final time. Not at the signage, not at the refreshments, at the chair. The one everyone avoided, then remembered, then finally respected. He didn't sit this time. He didn't need to. He'd already carried the lesson. And lessons like this, you don't recite them. You become them. Across the city, Malcolm sat on a rooftop terrace, a different one. Not event-sponsored, not 5-star. Just quiet. His tea gone cold. Phone buzzing somewhere behind him. Jana had left him a message. Echelon Group requested a private apology. We decline. Statement drafted if you prefer silence. He didn't reply. Didn't need to. Because this time, silence wasn't absence. It was victory. He watched the skyline. This wasn't pride. This wasn't vengeance. This was peace. Not because justice had come loudly, but because dignity had held its seat and changed the room without shouting. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a card, worn edges, handwritten initials on the back. A note from his mother, folded decades ago. Don't rush to prove you belong. Walk like you always did. He folded it back and smiled. Later that week, a video surfaced. It wasn't Clara's. Not official. Not cut for virality. Just a shaky clip, 30 seconds long. Preston saying move it. Malcolm saying nothing. Then, I didn't take your seat. You took mine. It went global. Not for our age. For precision. Because some truths don't need debate. They just need to be said once the right way. Malcolm never addressed it. He didn't need to. Because some men build legacies by staying loud. And others, by refusing to stand when the world doubts they should sit. The chair is gone now. Moved in the next day's cleanup. Replaced for another summit. But somewhere, in every corner of tech, finance, enterprise, there's a new kind of room taking shape. Not because they made space for him, but because he showed them what it means to take space without asking. And when you do that, when you take your seat without flinching, folding, or explaining, you don't just own the room, you redefine it forever.